That's the significance. No man. But that the Father would love us that much to want to call us to himself. That's significant. That's important in discipleship. Notice also not only the significance of the calling, but notice the sufficiency of the calling. What do we mean by sufficiency of the calling? We mean an adequate supply of resources. That's what we talk about when we say the sufficiency. An adequate supply of resources. He called the 12, but he also has called you and I to discipleship. And there was a significant adequate supply of resources to do it. Stay with me in John and come to chapter 12 and verse 32, and we'll see this sufficiency of the call. Again, the emphasis is upon coming to Christ and coming to him, the meaning of what does it mean to be called to come to him, an invitation to come. So what about the sufficiency of it? John 12 and verse 32. And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. You see the sufficiency there? You see the adequate supply of resources? How do we see the significance in the adequate supply? Because once again, notice the universality of this. He says, all, if I be lifted up. The story goes back to the book of Numbers. And it's interesting that the Jewish people would be aware of this story. So the context is fitting what Jesus is saying. Because in the book of Numbers 21, 8 and 9, you and I know that a plague had gone out. God tells Moses to make a brass serpent and put it upon a brass pole and hold it up. And as the serpents would bite the people in the plague, every single person that would look to the serpent that's on the pole will live and be healed. Every single one. Not everybody looked. Now, it wasn't mystical and magical, and that's what they use it for, because later in life they had to get rid of it because the people began to worship the pole. I find it interesting that it was the sign of healing, and I find it even interesting even more that our whole medical profession has used that symbol of the serpent on the pole to be a sign of healing. Goes back to Numbers 21, 8 and 9. Jesus knew the audience. He knew that they were aware of the story. He knew that many people died as a result of the plague because many people did not have the faith. It wasn't the pole that healed the people. It wasn't the serpent that healed the people. It was God who healed the people. But he did it by way of their faith and obedience to him. So you can imagine Jesus, who is the perfect illustrator, the one who was the master at telling parables and stories and giving word pictures. And still today, it is the most effective way of teaching when you can present a picture to someone's mind. So here they had that on their mind. And here's what Jesus says. If I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. There's a lot of debate about all men. Well, all men doesn't mean every man. It only means those who are simply ordained to be called. I am one who believes that all men means all men. Like my professor used to say, you know what all men means in the Greek? All men. It means all men. All is all. Every. Why does he mean that? Because that is the desire that God has for the world. What he's saying is that all men, that my grace is sufficient in the call, so that if I am lifted up from the earth, Every man won't be saved. But certainly there is an adequate, sufficient supply of God's grace to save the whole world. That is certainly his desire. Look at 1 Peter chapter 2